Max, what are we reviewing today? And anybody else looking at this? It is from Cocinas to Lucha Libre Ringsides. This is edited by Frederick, Aldama, and Angela Sanchez, but it's got about a zillion other authors in it. It is a Latinx comics anthology, and um, I will show a bit of the main chunks here. So it gets the names from predominantly happening stories about cocinas, which is kitchen. So various food related stories. That's the first big section with some various chapters here, and you can just see how many authors are here. Then the second one is about sports. So a bunch of them are about wrestling, which is really cool. We also have a bunch about soccer and some other competition. Um, and so, yeah, let's get right into it. The patent pending scoring system. We can start out with the characters. Unfortunately, I only gave this one a 1. Here's my reasons. I'll go back to the sort of scope of this book. I think there might be 50 separate stories in about 180 pages. Many of the stories are 2 pages long, and I think that I had a good chat with one of my friends about reading books like this for trying to learn something about the history of a time, place, people, that kind of a thing. And I do think one critique is that you just if it's too far from what you know, it could be too brief an experience. You don't really take a lot away from it. I think that is definitely true if if the again, that can definitely happen. Where I think the really good books do it is that you end up spending time, maybe an hour, 2 hours with the same characters in a really immersive historical or cultural environment. Again, like Himawari House, you had these, 3 roommates that you really cared about, and you really got to, I think, look and breathe the feel of living in Japan for like a year. It was one of the, in Helena, Filipina, it was one of the reviews, I think, of the book was saying how this like gives you that feeling of taking a brief vacation in Manila, and getting the look and feel of being there as like a digital, as like a tourist, a virtual one. And countless other good books. I think you can remember parts of it. You can have distinct memories. I think tied to a really good through line with the characters they draw you to invest and care about it. So I believe that that's definitely what these can do, and they can be gateways into deeper understanding. If you read a graphic novel, maybe you read, again, like many people, I haven't reviewed it yet, but many people might have read Mouse or Persepolis, and wanted then to learn more about World War II or Iran. So the comic can be this beautiful piece of art that's also a gateway to, audiobooks, history books, art, what have you. Um, that's the good side of it. This, I do think, while I love the idea of bringing together all these different authors to go kind of tackle food and sports related things, the 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 character score I had to kind of give a 1 because for so many of these stories, you might get to know the characters over 2 pages. You can't invest in that. You can't even remember that basically. Um, and some of them almost didn't involve characters at all. They might be sort of a mix between like a cookbook and like a comic book version of a like a cookbook. One of the characters in one of these stories I do remember, not for a good reason, but just because it like was a literal poop. So yeah, I think the way that this hit me was just, you know, they were so rapid fire. The problem is, if I were drawing analogies, right, um, to truly learn about history, you'd have to commit. I guess, like again, the message is the medium, right? If you really want to learn about a culture, I think the most extreme thing you can do, right, is like move to a particular country, and really try to soak it up. Like if you really wanted to learn about Mexico, go live in Mexico for a year or two or more, right? That'll be the most real version, I think, of like understanding Mexican culture. Um, I think in lieu of that, if you're not ready to pick up your whole life, then I think you might go on trips there. You might start reading books about it. You might try to do like local things wherever you live, connected to the culture. And then I think that like those like in terms of intensity, there, especially on the reading side, maybe the like maybe again reading like a really good graphic novel about a place is kind of like watching a really good YouTube video about it or something. It like gets you invested and maybe willing to jump into deeper things. I think the problem with this book to me was, which is why ultimately it's connected to the character score. This is the most long part of talking about this because it's kind of like what I would say is the challenge with this book. I think this is like the TikTok in some sense, where it's so brief and so quick. I don't know how you can take a. It's like I can see it being like briefly enjoyable to read one of these stories. Some of them are funny. I'm showing you some of the art along the way. I thought the art was quite good. Like it's quite diverse. You get some really different perspectives with color, with style. Not surprising for like an anthology, just like all kinds of different, really interesting representations. I think like if you're into if you're into this kind of stuff, I also like love. I think my favorites were at some of the beginning of the sports and wrestling sections. So the art is totally great, and again, this fits an anthology. One of the strengths of an anthology like this is that it'll have like really different, interesting art. But I do think the length of the stories and just the sheer number of them, it just takes away from much to remember. Again, it's like this feels too much like a TikTok or a YouTube short kind of a problem where it's so rapid fire. In a month, I can't imagine a lot of people remembering a single name of a single person in any of these stories. I think that's kind of my bigger criticism, is that you don't get to dive deep into anything, which I just think hurts the whole experience. I'll sort of hop around here a little bit because I feel like I gave my biggest criticism. On the positive side, again, I like thought the artwork is great, and in terms of history culture, I still gave it a 5 overall because you'll learn about tamales. You'll get some authentic things like about parties and pig roasts and things like that. Obviously, wrestling and soccer are huge cultural touchstones in the sporting world, in the Latinx community. I think they do, you get kind of, again, that sense of the history. Some of the like day-to-day history and culture parts, very much like the title says, this is kind of about, sports and cooking. I think you get those senses. But again, due to the briefness of it, I don't think you can fully dive in and appreciate some of them. And some of them just, I think are more like telling jokes than anything else, which is okay. But I this wouldn't be the reason I would come back to reread this for sure. Is the history and culture part just wasn't strong enough, I think, to say like it's much past like kind of a middle score here. Readability, this is a weird one. I gave this a 3 because I think just the way this is structured, of course it's highly readable. Many of the pages don't have that much text, and they're so dang rapid fire. I mean, you could, if you wanted to, you could just keep stringing along. But at the same time, I had to keep this pretty low because this wasn't, I didn't finish this book, not because it was like unreadable. Like I've had some, not that any book is unreadable, but I've had other ones where I ran into a wall a couple hours in and I just couldn't go further because even though the idea was interesting, it was just so dense or hard to read physically. Like Toxic Tropics I thought was a great book, but the text size was so hard to read, like it was like actually painful after a while. This was more just like I just couldn't get invested in it very much because, again, of how snapshotty brief it was. And at some point it's like, why am I going to read another like 2-page story that I'm not even going to remember 2 seconds later? I think it's, if you wanted to read through it, you could absolutely do it. That's kind of how I landed. I guess the last part for the X Factor, again, I do think it's really interesting. Like I love, the classic wrestling style. So I love anything that brings wrestling into a comic book. One of my favorite graphic novels, I don't think it would really fit this series, but was just basically about Andre the Giant's life. I love that kind of stuff. So I think it's got a decent X Factor score, but overall, if you want like a very brief like TikTok-y experience and you want to see some great art, this is a good book. But I think Again, if you really want to get deeper into the cultural part, and if you want to have a book that would bring you along with characters, this probably isn't it. But this still might be an interesting one for you. So I'll leave it at that.